Severance, also known as the definition of a slow burn. I think this may be one of the greatest shows I've ever seen. By the way, I decided to dress appropriately for the occasion. I also have blue. I have blue in the background. It's like Lumen. I swear the main reason this video was delayed was because I just kept rewatching the last minute over and over and over again. Here's my in-depth analysis and explanation of Severance Season 1. But let's kick off this orientation with a spoiler warning. This is Mark S. He has kind eyes, but recently his eyes have been red from producing tears, not because of an elevator allergy, but because 2 years ago, Mark supposedly lost his wife, Gemma, after she supposedly got in a car accident. Supposedly. Mark was in a really dark place, and he was unable to perform his job as a history professor, primarily teaching World War I. Oh, sorry, the Great War. Mark undergoes this thing called the severance procedure so he can spare himself from all this grieving and, you know, just give himself a break from the pain. So Mark S ends up working on the severed floor at Lumen. By the way, the Lumen building actually exists. It's called the Bell Labs Homedale Complex, located in Homedale, New Jersey. Anyway, Mark gets severed, which is supposedly an irreversible procedure. Supposedly. Where the person's brain is split into two, essentially creating two different people, an innie for Lumen and an outie for the real world. On the severed floor, Mark works with Dylan, Irving, not you, Milchick, and Miss Cobell. Oh, and Grainer. Let's not forget about Grainer. After Mark's not-so-mutual best friend Petey leaves, he is replaced with Helly R, also known as Helena Eagan, daughter of Jame Eagan, the current CEO of Lumen. But it's not like there's any clues throughout the season hinting at this reveal. Oh wait, there are! We open this series with the question, who are you?
Who are you?
A question directed towards Helly, subconsciously placing the idea in our minds that we have to figure out who she is. And throughout Season 1, we see the outies of Mark, Petey, Irving, Helly, and Dylan. But up until Episode 9, the only outie we don't see outside of Lumen is Helly. Helly's outie immediately denied Helly's resignation request, and Mark even claims that he never saw a resignation request get such a quick turnaround, because Helly would immediately deny her resignation request as she already knows she's imprisoning herself. And Helly still wouldn't quit after she tried to take herself out with an extension cord. Milchick even states that when they heard Helly was coming, it was like a miracle. Helly, being an Eagan, also explains why the board was video conferencing in when Mark was being promoted to senior refiner. And it also explains why Cobell was so upset with Mark when he screwed up the orientation, and why Miss Cobell was fired after it was discovered that Helly R tried to take herself out with that one extension cord and permanently leave the company. I heard some people say that Judd being absent when Helly was trying to take herself out with the extension cord was also a hint that Helly was an Eagan, because why would the security need to be checking on an Eagan? And we also saw in the control room that there is a monitor showing who's coming up and down the elevator. But even after all that evidence, this was actually not a hint that Helly was an Eagan. Judd was technically on time because they stagger the exits by 15 minutes. So if the severed employees get out at 5, then he should have been there at 5:15, which he was. He was just a few seconds late. Also, in episode 1, Helly's outie is wearing the same outfit that we see Miss Cobell wearing throughout the series, revealing to us from the beginning that she was high up in the company. Anyway, when Petey was drawing the map, Mark goes like, "What are you drawing?" Petey lies by telling Mark that he was drawing him in Cubist form, referring to Cubism, an early 20th century art movement. Cubist artwork often depicts the subject in this fragmented way, so you're seeing the subject from like multiple viewpoints at the same time, almost like they've been broken up and rearranged. The perfect kind of artwork to represent what's going on in the minds of the severed employees at Lumen. And speaking of artwork, what the heck is going on with Irving and his outie constantly painting that scary hallway over and over again? Up until now, there's only been one person who had the severance procedure reversed, and that would be former Lumen employee Petey. He went through the process known as reintegration. That's the correct term. It's not called getting unsevered, Mark. But Petey could only reintegrate himself with help from Orgabi, the one person responsible for placing that chip in his head. But it appears that there are leaks in the minds of the severed employees, as thoughts and memories are exchanged between the innie and the outie. Mark's wife crashed her car into a tree, supposedly. So during Mark's wellness check with Miss Casey, aka his wife Gemma, a tree is intentionally placed in the middle of the room. Cobell even goes as far as stealing Gemma's candle from Mark's basement, so that she could see if the memories could break through. Mark's innie, molding the clay into the shape of a tree, proves that it's possible. His innie still subconsciously feels the loss of his wife. Even though he can't fully understand why he feels the sadness, he still carries the pain with him. Irv's innie is always dozing off in the middle of the workday. This is because his outie stays up late every night painting, which is why he has black paint under his fingernails and why he is almost consumed by black paint when he dozes off. Oh, and Irving's outie being an artist, specifically a painter, explains why Irv appreciates the paintings at Lumen. Irv's been painting the elevator door to the testing floor. Petey told Mark's outie that he came across a department where you don't get to leave, a place where Lumen employees are there 24 hours, 7 days a week. Petey was most likely referring to the testing floor. Gemma was returning to the testing floor, telling us that Gemma hasn't left the Lumen building in over 2 years. The fact that Irv is painting this elevator means he's seen this hallway before, but clearly something happened to make Irv and his outie unable to recall the memory. In episode 8, Dylan quickly scrolls through the system functions menu. It appears that the menu determines what happens to selected users. One of the options is a clean slate, so we now know that Lumen has the ability to erase an innie at any point, something that Miss Cobell threatens to do to Helly's innie in episode 9. Here's something that trips me out though. In the painting of the hallway to the testing floor, we see the elevator, as you know, but the red light is on. The person going to the testing floor doesn't have this view because they're inside of the elevator when the red light turns on. The only person who would be able to see the red light would be someone like Milchick, hinting at the fact that maybe Irv had Milchick's job at one point. Irving could have easily been moved from one job to another because branch transfer is the second option on the system functions menu. This would explain why Milchick ignores Irving every single time he walks in the room, as there may be some animosity between them that Irving doesn't remember. But the more likely scenario is that Burt and Irving met way earlier, but their relationship got in the way of productivity, or they tried rebelling against the system, which means both Burt and Irv had to be reset. Irving seeing the photo of his dad was a huge moment for him. He was fully indoctrinated into this cult known as Lumen, and viewed himself as a child of Eagan, since Lumen's model is that workers are essentially family. Now that Irving's innie has seen his real family on the outside, it further separates him from Lumen, the same way Dylan started rebelling after he saw his son. But what truly turned Irving off from Lumen was knowing that Burt will lose the memory of him, because it almost appears that this isn't the first time Irv's been through something like this. Inside the trunk in his house, he has an article about a Severed employee suing Lumen over an injury that their innie received. So Irving's outie must be on a similar journey as Mark's outie. Irving either stole or put together a list of Severed employees at Lumen. Ian Burley tried to make contact with him, or the inverse of that. If Burley was the one who tried reaching out, it means that Irv and Mark's outies are not alone. Seeing Burt's address on the list of employees tells us that he and Burt must already know each other in real life. This also further proves the theory that Irv and Burt's innies already had a relationship in the past. The other names we see on the map could be other relationships Irv had inside Lumen, or people that he just became close with. Miss Casey is an absolute gem, and not because her name is Gemma, but because of how much of an incredible person she was in such a short time span. She just randomly tells Irving that Birchie is in the conference room. She went out of her way to get those two together after just seeing them one time chatting outside of her office, which is why it severely bothers me that Miss Casey was repeatedly asking for a hug during her observation of Helly, not just to see if anyone needed one, but more because she needed one. I'm just gonna go ahead and boldly propose the theory that Gemma is actually dead. Even if my theory's horribly wrong, which it may be, there's still some good stuff here, so pay attention. In this theory, I'm just gonna assume that Lumen got a hold of Gemma's body before she passed. Lumen does have a hold over their town. Most of their housing is owned by Lumen. Mark receives a gift card to a restaurant that's named after former Lumen CEO Philip Pip Eagan. And oh yeah, the town is literally named after Lumen's founder. So Lumen must have had some connections to the hospitals or something, just so they could grab people who are declared dead and pull some sketchy experiments with them. Lumen must have used the chip technology to save her consciousness, and then copied that consciousness into a body that they grew. The only reason I say this is because of several reasons, actually. One of those reasons being the first question that Helly Zinni asked Mark, specifically asking, "Am I livestock? Did you grow me as food?" So far, Severance has been known to plant some seeds in seemingly insignificant significant lines of dialogue. We know that Mark can feel past memories like the tree, and Irving's doing the paintings over here. So who's to say that Helly's question wasn't based on the knowledge of her outie, as Helena would be pretty high up in the company, like high up enough to know if they're growing people or not. But during Helly's talk with her father, Jame Eagan, James says to her, "One day you will sit with me at my revolving." And look, I don't know what the that's supposed to mean, but I'm gonna go ahead and assume that Eagan is trying to live forever. When discussing the concept of hell, Cobell says that whatever humans can imagine, they can create. Hence, our basic understanding of the biblical hell doesn't actually exist, but humans can create their own hell. So who's to say that Lumen isn't trying to create their own heaven? Which would make sense, because the handbook is basically their Bible, and the songs and the culture and just like everything about Lumen emulates the religion. But then again, that's just conjecture. If you want a more realistic theory with more tangible evidence of what happened to Miss Casey, we gotta go back to that list of severed employees at Irv's place. There was another Lumen employee who was involved in a car accident before they got severed, with the question written next to it, did settlement lead to severance? Making me think there's some connection between people getting in accidents and people getting severed. Just another way the Lumen-controlled city is trying to exploit people. The MDR department came up with a plan where they would use the overtime contingency protocol to wake themselves up on the outside so that they can find someone they trust and then tell that person everything that's happening at Lumen. Irving chose to reach out to Burt, but he didn't get to him in time. But like I said, they probably know each other, so they can probably piece together what's happening. Helly Zinni got pretty far into her speech, so it won't matter if Helly got tackled in the middle of it. In fact, Helly getting tackled for the words that she was saying further proves to everyone that Helly Zinni was telling the truth. With the board knowing that the Innies are rebelling, they will become desperate to fix this PR nightmare. And in their time of desperation, they may rehire Cobell. In Miss Cobell's weird shrine to Kier, there's a piece of medical equipment with the name Charlotte Cobell on it. It seems that Mark and Miss Cobell both joined Lumen because of the loss of a loved one. That's why Cobell empathizes with Mark's struggle. It says the year 1944 on the piece of medical equipment, so it could have just belonged to Cobell's mother who was working at Lumen in the past, telling us that Cobell is continuing her mother's legacy at the company. Mark Zinni was thrown into Rickon's narcissist-filled book reading, and for a 2-year-old, I thought Mark handled the situation pretty well. He informed Devin on what was happening at Lumen. He also told Devin who her new friend was, meaning Cobell no longer has an in with Mark's outie. Devin can use Riken's connections to journalists that aren't tied to Lumen. And for those worried that Mark's "she's alive" is too broad of a phrase and no one will know who he's referring to, well, there's no need to worry, because Mark was holding that picture of Gemma in his hand when he said it, meaning when outie Mark wakes up, he and everyone else can put 2 and 2 together, that Gemma is alive and she is at the Lumen building. By the way, I know there's some eccentric people at that book reading, but everyone has to be thinking that Mark and Devin are losing it. And speaking of people losing it, James. When James talks to Helly, he tells her that the prototype of the chip for Severance was green and blue. This explains why Helena wore green and blue that night, and why the severed employees were primarily blue. This also explains the blue and green color scheme of the MDR office and other departments around the facility. And speaking of explaining things, the gala explains so much. Like how Milchick kept taking photos throughout the season so they could be displayed at the gala to convince everyone that getting severed is cool beans. It's not entirely known what the MDR department exactly does at this point, but the majority of it so far has been an experiment to show off the benefits of severance. So they keep the department separated to not interfere with that. Milchick pulled a 266 on Irving to deter him from visiting Burt and O&D, sharing the painting of a massacre that never happened, in order to ignite fear amongst the departments and keep everyone separated. This is why there were 2 versions of the same painting depending on which department was looking at it. Lumen is trying to lobby for legalized severance on the state, basically to get everyone chipped. The state senator who's advocating for this and his wife used the chip so that his wife doesn't have to experience childbirth. I thought it was an interesting parallel how it stated that the senator's wife has 3 kids, and Dylan also has 3 kids. And there's this juxtaposition with Milchick where Dylan shouts at him saying that he just wants to remember his kid being born, but the senator's wife chooses not to remember the birth of her child. Just thought that was an interesting difference difference in values. Jame Eagan claims that he wants everyone to be chipped so that they'll all be Kier's children. I'm assuming the beehive in the system functions menu has something to do with this. If they can chip everyone, they can turn everyone into a clean slate and then raise them to be like Irving from the beginning of this season. When discussing his life's greatest achievement, Kier identified 4 components that he calls tempers, from which he derived every human soul: woe, frolic, death, and malice. At one of the more interesting Waffle parties that I've witnessed, we see all 4 tempers, shown to us the same way that they were depicted in the Lumen painting, as we also see the mask of Kier and the whip on the bed. One of the tempers is depicted as a goat, like the ones we see in the one-man department of a guy who just raises goats. I'm still trying to tell if they're trying to represent the 4 tempers with the 4 employees that make up the MDR department. The whip on the bed contains the 9 core principles. Those principles being vision, verve, wit, cheer, humility, benevolence, nimbleness, probity, and, oh yeah, wiles. Words that have been incorporated into the vernacular of Lumen employees. I thought it was interesting how there were 9 core principles and all 8 CEOs have been of the Eagan lineage. James is number 8, and it's clear that the next CEO is going to be Helly's Audi, making her number 9. There's also a total of 9 episodes in season 1, which doesn't really seem like a coincidence. The Waffle Party goes from the first thing you do when you wake up, eating breakfast, to the last thing you do at the end of the day, going to bed. The 2 things Innie's never experienced. Irving tries making light of this earlier in the season, starting every day making the joke, "Hey kids, what's for dinner?" They said it doesn't make sense why Irv refers to them as kids. Like, why would the kids be making the adult dinner? But Irv simply views himself and the rest of his coworkers as children of Kier. Rickon wrote The UUR, a book that is the antithesis of the Compliance Handbook, which is why it's the color red in contrast with the Lumen blue, and why the Severance employees wear warmer colors when they start rebelling against Lumen. One book focuses on the collective, while the other focuses on independence, and both authors can be viewed as extremists, as they both created their own types of modern religion, and both religions lack dinner. So who's to say that one is better than the other? With these books being on 2 completely opposite ends of the spectrum, it seems that the middle ground between these very extreme teachings is what's going to end up freeing the MDR department. So that was everything I had to say today about Severance Season 1. And if you like this video, good. I put everything I have into my videos, so you can definitely expect this kind of analysis for any show that I tackle. This is a very elongated way of me saying subscribe. Let me know if you want to see me talk more about Severance, and if you want to see me talk about other shows, also let me know about them in the comments below. Thanks for watching.